It's Anonymous MD with Dr. T.
And Lisa.
Dr. T brings the real and refreshing insights, straightforward, evidence-based, and up-to-date. Now here's the doctor and Lisa.
Hey, welcome back, Lisa.
Hey, Dr. T. Nice to hear you again. I've been missing you this week.
Yeah, we're doing things a little bit differently in the name of social isolation. So we're doing some remote recording today.
That's right. Thankfully, Best Buy delivers microphones at a fairly quick speed. So here we are. We're ready to go.
I must say your microphone's looking quite professional and snazzy.
Thank you.
Yeah, so
it's my favorite
March
new
31st.
accessory.
Yes, we keep building on this hobby / giving back to the listeners and trying to help put things into perspective. And again, we keep going back to that whole idea of staying grounded and thinking through things rationally, and that way we'll be better able to navigate through this very unprecedented time.
That's right. All right.
So
what do you
should
got
we go
for us
over
today?
let's go over some numbers quick. So a couple housekeeping things.
Okay.
So, first let's talk about the platforms that we're available on now, because we've made some progress there. We're on YouTube, we're on Spotify. And in the past week, we just got approved on Google Play. And last night we got great news that we've been approved on Apple. So you can find us on the podcast app and just search for Anonymous MD with Dr. T and Lisa. And hopefully we come up.
That's right, guys. Now we're on all the platforms. You can't avoid us.
Can't avoid it. And I guess this is probably the part where we're supposed to say like, subscribe, share, and that really helps disseminate our message and get it out there.
That's right. And send us all your good energy because we can use it.
Please.
Thank you.
Yes. And I think we have a social media account now on Instagram, Anonymous MD. So
we do. And I noticed that you have been expressing yourself in another way other than just on this podcast. So I see you've been doing some artwork, which is amazing. I've noticed you've been posting it up there.
Well, yeah, I think this is a great opportunity for individuals to rediscover themselves. There is always an opportunity to turn a bad situation into some form of good. And I've really found a lot of peace and comfort in being able to draw again. So I think overall, it's going to help me be better at what I do in my profession and taking care of patients, just because it's giving me some more inner peace.
I love that. I need to hear something like that today, actually. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. So
yes, it's been a challenging time. So today's March 31st. And as of the latest statistics, we're looking at just under 150,000 cases of coronavirus around the world. And we're edging over 40,000 deaths. So that gives us an idea of the exponential growth in terms of cases and deaths. But today we're going to take a little bit of a shift, and we're going to talk a little bit more about psychology and mass psychology and philosophize a little bit about that. So what do you think? You ready to do something a little different today and talk?
I think me and my brain are game for a little philosophizing, as you say. Let's do it.
Are you ready for a pop quiz, Lisa?
Oh, always when I hang out with you. Absolutely.
So let me ask you to define a couple of words for me. Let's start with opportunity. So off the top of your head, what comes to mind when I say the word opportunity?
An opportunity is a chance to create some sort of change, whether it is good or bad, that will affect things going forward.
Brilliant. So the key word I want our listeners to focus on is this word chance. So you started off by saying it's a chance. And if you look at the definition in the dictionary, indeed, it's defined as a good chance for advancement or progress. How about if you define adversity? How do you define adversity?
I would define it as an obstacle in the path to fulfilling something or completing a mission.
That's right. And usually adversity is not planned for. So it's something that we face that was unexpected. And the definition in the dictionary is a state or instance of serious or continued misfortune or bad luck. So again, let's focus in on this word misfortune or fortune. So you can see embedded in both of those definitions is this whole idea of uncertainty. And if we define uncertainty, we can define it as lacking in a definite knowledge. And I want to take the time today to explore uncertainty, especially in this COVID-19 era, and really dissect the term and come up with the sub definitions that helps us put everything into perspective.
Okay, great. That's it.
You have it.
Sorry, is the pop quiz over? I just need to know so I can take a deep breath and relax now.
That's it for now, but I'd stay on the edge of your seat. You never know. You never know when another pop quiz will come up.
Of course.
So, so do you have any comments or questions or anything that comes to mind when you think about this word uncertainty?
Well, I think it's interesting that it's there are few things that are certain, is what I think about when I hear the word uncertainty. So I think uncertainty, but of course, is sort of my thought process. Um, the only thing, right? The only things that are certain in life are death and taxes. And I think everything else falls outside of that.
And there's always some truth behind the old adages that we use. And indeed, you're kind of looking forward to this whole idea of uncertainty being part of the human discovery. You know, when we define uncertainty, it really doesn't carry with it any inherent connotations. So it's neither meant to be a positive or negative term. However, we know, and this is evidence based, that when we look at the way humans process uncertainty or the psychology behind uncertainty, the studies unequivocally show that it's associated with what's called a negative affect. Now, I want to take a second here. Affect. If you notice, I use the word affect, and it's
With
a
an
term
A.
we with an A, not an E. That's right.
Mm.
So when we talk about affect, you could think about it as if it's the weather, the person's current state or mood, emotional state.
Okay.
And in fact, I said mood there, but I shouldn't say mood there because mood is the counterpart to affect. And the mood, you can think of it more as the season. So it's more the overriding and general emotional state that really defines a person's current emotional standpoint. So if we think of affect as the weather, it's more of a short term gauge. And if we think of mood as the season, it's more of an overriding, even personality trait, you can almost say. And so uncertainty, we know, is associated with a negative affect. And basically, we tend to have negative perceptions of uncertainty. So,
So
do you
what would a negative affect be for uncertainty? Let's give somebody an example of what that would look like. So would it be anxiety?
Yes, very
Um,
good. Unhealthy anxiety. So we know
mm,
that there's a certain level of healthy anxiety that gets us out of bed in the morning and keeps us organized and focused on tasks that matter, including family obligations, work obligations, social obligations, etc. But when we talk about other types of negative affects, we can also group in there depression, which is very common negative affect that people experience,
mhm.
or sadness, I think would be a better indicator. Whereas depression may describe the overlying mood of a person.
Okay.
All right.
Got it. Yep. Thank you.
Now, do you feel this negative connotation we place to uncertainty? Can you give me an example of a positive kind of uncertainty that one may feel, or something that you've felt in the past?
Um, I think that let's have an example of somebody planning a romantic date for you and you don't know where you're going and you're filled with uncertainty. And if you're me, you're a little bit annoyed that you don't know how you're supposed to dress, but you stuff down that annoyed feeling because that's irrational. and you enjoy the delight of the surprise and the not knowing.
That's right. And
Mhm.
let's extend that example you used of relationships. How about when the engagement or proposal is going to
Oh,
happen,
good one. See,
or
I've never
planning?
gotten there yet, so it wasn't even in my in my Rolodex
Oh,
of examples.
whoever gets you there is one lucky gentleman,
Oh,
and
yes.
you're the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So remember that. How about travel to exotic destinations? There's definitely a lot of uncertainty involved in that, or education or further education when we're charting our career paths, or retirement when we're planning our retirement. Lots of uncertainty, and yet so much of that uncertainty can be looked at in a positive light, right?
It's true. Or think about, having your first child and
Ah,
suddenly being given this little tiny creature you're responsible to keep alive to take home from the hospital.
and you're like, oh boy, now what do I do here? I am
Right.
responsible for the livelihood of this little vulnerable creature.
Right.
But it's a wonderful thing. And parenthood is another great example of uncertainty in which we could have positive feelings and affects towards. Let's break down uncertainty another way. Okay. Instead of looking at it positive and negative, let's look at uncertainty from the standpoint of internal uncertainty and external uncertainty.
Hmm,
And let's
okay.
imagine that those levels of uncertainty are on either end of a spectrum. Okay. Well, you
Yep.
could see that now I'm being interrupted by Leo, my wonderful Leo, and here comes grandma to pick him up and take him away. So there was obviously a lot of uncertainty on if I was going to get interrupted today during this podcast at home, but that
A
was
2-year-old
blessed.
will do that, right? So
You will do that. So let's look at internal uncertainty and external uncertainty on either ends of a spectrum. And let's define internal uncertainty as something in which the individual has control over, in which they have at least some level of control over. Maybe they have full control over it, maybe they have
hmm,
partial control over it. And at the other end of the spectrum, let's look at external uncertainties, or uncertainties that are imposed on an individual in which they have no control over the outcomes or the imposition of that
okay.
uncertainty. And then look at everything in between, and uncertainty can fall anywhere within that spectrum. All
So
right.
it can be both internal and external at the same time?
It definitely can. So let's take any one of the examples you just gave us. Well, if we're traveling to an exotic destination, for example, there is a lot of internal uncertainty which we have control over. For example, we may be uncertain about how many pieces of a certain type of clothing we need to bring. And yet we have control over that because we can decide to rewear or reuse or wash in the bathtub or wash in the sink or find a laundromat. So we can actually decide how we want to handle that uncertainty based on our action. However, we don't have control over all the external surroundings in this exotic destination. We don't know what people we're going to deal with, or we're at the whim of the airline companies. If we get delayed, we may miss our connection. We may meet somebody and fall in love with somebody just because of the perfect timing. So there is a lot of
And then
external
who's
uncertainty
moving
there.
where? Look at that. Just a whole spiral
Oh,
of uncertainty.
in this day and age with with social distancing and remote relationships, I think maybe people don't need to move anywhere.
That's a good point.
Maybe it'd just be difficult having children, but
Right.
anyways, we digress. So where do you think COVID-19 sits?
I think that it's probably right in the center of that Venn diagram where internal and external uncertainty overlap. Because, in my opinion, I can control how often I wash my hands, if I'm isolating myself, if I'm staying 6 feet away from people. Um, but I can't control what's happening globally. And if others around me get sick because maybe they haven't washed their hands once or somebody sneezed on them. There are things that are out of our control. A lot of it, in this case, I think is out of our control. But I've been trying to remind myself about the things that are in my control and focus on those.
And so you are essentially employing some cognitive therapy strategies to empower yourself to say, this uncertainty is not being completely imposed on me. I have the mechanisms in place by which to reduce the risk of infection, by which to reduce the risk of illness or spreading that illness onto family members. But by that same token, this is a mass shared collective external uncertainty in the sense that the virus is a new pathogen that mutated from animals and is newly being introduced to the human species. It is, despite being contact and droplet transmitted, it is highly transmissible compared to other viruses with the same mechanism. And in the age of travel and air travel and cruise ships, et cetera, it's really spread fast and it has really affected a lot of different cities and households. Now, why is COVID-19 an unprecedented external uncertainty? Really, because it affects every single human being on Earth in a way that probably has not been seen since World War II.
Mm.
And we talk about other pandemics, we talk about Ebola or HIV or malaria. Well, what's different about those pathogens is that not everybody on Earth was susceptible to catching them because there were certain demographics and risk factors, such as location, such as lifestyle choices, et cetera, in which people could really shield themselves. But in this case, it's a respiratory tract infection that really any human being is susceptible to. And so, this whole idea of a global shared collective uncertainty that is being imposed on us is really what's unique about this situation. And as you alluded to, we need to recognize that it's almost impossible to land completely on one end of a spectrum, and that there is some uncertainty that is intertwined in this situation in which we do have control about, right? So note that, we didn't say whether this external collective shared uncertainty is positive or negative, but our tendency is to associate a negative affect with it. And really, when we're talking about uncertainty that affects every human being on earth, we can now really start to talk about the state of humanity becoming uncertain. Now, that may be blowing things out of proportion, and I really think it is blowing things out of proportion. But this is the tendency of thought that we have to interrupt and recognize that we have a way of playing a role in how serious this becomes and how we come out of it stronger as a human race. And that's the mood or the season we need to set among our listeners, one of empowerment and one of collective thought and rational planning by which we can come together and come up with strategies. And that's what we're going to go into next week on episode 4. We're going to start to tie all of the science and psychology and philosophy behind what we've talked about and put them into practical calls of action for our
That's
listeners.
amazing. Oh, I can't wait, because you know what? There's nothing better for anxiety and worry than action, no matter what it is. So, like I said, and you mentioned it was very cognitive behavioral based, is that, knowing that I can control if I am wiping down my door handles with Lysol wipes, and if I'm washing my hands, and if I'm working remotely or recording a podcast over the internet instead of in a studio with my friend. These are all things that I can control. And it really does put things into perspective to know that not everything is sort of spiraling wildly around you. And so I think that if humanity can grasp that and realize that there are things that can be controlled in helping others and helping ourselves, we'll be in a much better place. So I always like to think about examples of incredible businesses that start during terrible times. So during the last recession, for example, in 2008, and the years after, where know, were bad, um, you know, the companies that came out of it were WhatsApp, Pinterest, Instagram, Uber, and then Slack, Square. And then if you have, even look at 1929, that's the year that Walt Disney Productions was incorporated. So it's uncertainty is a great time for creativity and for people to take those tools that are suddenly more available to them because they are devalued by the uncertainty and the economy, and take that opportunity like you made me define earlier.
So,
That it's amazing. So I'm really excited to almost see what comes of this in the end.
well, let's just tie what you just said and bring it back to the beginning of the episode where we defined adversity and opportunity. And we found that both of those words are grounded in uncertainty, except one carries with it a positive connotation and the other one carries with it a negative connotation. And in my opinion, in a thesaurus, and I didn't look this up, but in a thesaurus, I believe these two words should be synonyms. And we need to consider adversity as just another form of opportunity. So you're alluding to this whole idea of human evolution, our ability to use the frontal cortex, our gift from whoever that may be. And in order for us to collectively embrace uncertainty and use it to improve, adapt, not just individually, but also systematically, we can now reduce redundancies and improve efficiencies and start to really come out of this in the 21st century. Change is hard to impose without some kind of motivation. And yet, when humans are forced to change, they do so with remarkable efficiency and at remarkable speeds. And that's what we're seeing. What we can't do is allow ourselves to feel helpless. We can't allow fear to create avoidance, and that avoidance to cost us an opportunity cost. So we need to not succumb to our fate, but rather seize the opportunity. And that's really the message today from today's podcast.
What a great message. I love that so much. I'm probably going to watch less Netflix over the next couple days because you've inspired me to, seize the opportunity and not
And
be complacent here. So that's fantastic.
And one final point I want to make before we wrap up is seizing the opportunity does not necessarily mean from a career or financial standpoint. If you're an individual who doesn't need to be working right now, and obviously there's been a complete global economic shutdown that the likes of which have never been seen before. Definitely not in our lifetime or the lifetime of the baby boomers. It just has not been seen. Some would even argue it's more catastrophic than the Great Depression. But if you're an individual who can ride out this storm, one, we need to feel blessed. And two, we need to take that opportunity to really rediscover and empower ourselves individually. It doesn't have to be a long process. It could be a process of days or weeks, but go back to your roots. Try and spend your time doing something that brings you sheer joy and happiness, something that you didn't have time for, but that you always wanted to get to, and start that rediscovery process. And from that, you will feel empowerment. And when we all feel that collective empowerment, we'll be ready to roll out of bed and get going with something that provides us some purpose. And you know what, Lisa? Netflix may be just that. Your rediscovery may be Netflix. Maybe you want to go back and watch all the episodes of Friends.
Yep, that's fine. I mean, I don't need to rediscover those, but thank you so much for your support. I so appreciate it.
But you do you.
Thanks, buddy. I am feeling good. And I know there's lots of work to be done because there are people who need the help right now. So there is no shortage of space for creativity and for good.
Absolutely. And, next week, like I said earlier, we're going to really start to give our listeners some practical tips on things they can do to not just help themselves come out of this better and stronger, but also to help our societies from small to large, including our global community, to come out of this feeling empowered and ready for anything that may arise in the future.
That's amazing. I can't wait for that. Have a great week, everyone.
You too, Lise. Big thank you to the Pod Plant for facilitating this remote recording.
Absolutely.
And the positive vibes that we're always getting.
Keep them coming.
Keep them coming. And guys, don't freak out. Just be conscientious and be diligent. And we'll talk to you guys soon.
That's right. Stay well, everyone. Speak soon.
Thanks for listening to the show. Subscribe wherever you're listening to the podcast. On YouTube, smash that bell. That's a notification button. Anytime the doctor knows something, so will you. Stay healthy. See you next time.